Pleasure to be here. My name is Andrew Higgins. I'm the director of marketing for a software company called Pixlee. Pixlee is a UGC platform, or a software platform that focuses on user-generated content and content marketing, so helping brands make use of all the high-quality creative being generated by customers. So, real quick overview before we jump in, things we'll cover today. First, we're going to discuss the demand on brands, on all of you, and adapt on how you adapt to the changes, both in consumer shopping behavior and the impact that shopping behavior is having on the customer journey. Second, we'll introduce a few strategies for understanding customers and creating more authentic brand experiences. And third, we're going to provide some industry examples and show you some brands that are really doing this right. Jumping straight in. So the first thing I kind of like to do is have a very human and a very real-world example of the problem. You can read, and I'm sure this data is not new to any of you, but we see a lot of ads every day, both traditional media as well as across social and digital and display, and ad recall is not getting better. As things get noisier, it's getting harder and harder for brands to cut through that noise. So the example I like to use, and travel is a great example, if everybody can think about a specific ad from a travel company that you remember. So go to that ad recall. Once you have the ad, if you can recall the ad, think about the emotion. Did it drive you to, hey, that really visceral reaction, oh, I really need to go there. I gotta mentally bookmark that. I gotta go back. I gotta find their website. So take that feeling, that emotion, table that for a sec. Now think about your interactions online, on social, and with real people. Everybody has that friend that you're always kind of confused when they find time to go to work. Always traveling, always going on awesome adventures. I can tell you right now, the 3 or 4 people in my Instagram feed that every month or so, I'm very jealous scrolling through their photos. That visceral, emotive reaction to travel, to experiences, like many of the brands that you all market and support, is a peer recommendation. That's word of mouth. So that in and of itself is not a new concept. The thing that's relevant to this conversation and today is the scale that now has. So we use the term quite often, the democratization of brands, the impact and influence that your customers and your audience has over brand perception, and how many of your purchase decisions are truly influenced by other people has gone up exponentially. So that faces, I get the question all the time, are tools being taken away from me as a marketer? As social media becomes larger and larger, as customers can influence more and more of your brand perception, is this autonomous? Do I have control anymore? And the answer is absolutely yes. The tools, you don't have less tools, you just need different tools. So that's really what I want to dive into today. So we talked about word of mouth, we talked about the impact, the increasing impact of customers over brand perception and purchase decisions. 3 of the big trends that are driving that. So the first being digital literacy. So media consumption has actually become social media consumption. And as brands are commanding less of consumers' attention, you're being forced to participate in a channel as opposed to broadcast through the channel. So we talk about community management, we talk about social media management. These are oftentimes replacing things like PR or a lot of aspects of traditional media. And while brands can reach giant audiences through social, they really have to share the channel, and it's a completely different voice. And in order to have success across social media, it requires a different level of authenticity. So more closely thinking about social media, the focus needs to be on participation and not broadcast. And then the second is word of mouth on steroids. I think a funny thing to think about is word of mouth was actually originally a literal term, and it was word of mouth. Today it means something entirely different. If we think about how many folks we actually speak with on a day-to-day basis, you actually discuss, what you did over the weekend. It's at least in my case, it's maybe a double-digit number each day. And then you look at the delta between that and what happens every time I post on social media. When I post about my camping trip, when I post about, my annual vacation, where I stayed, what I did, I have the ability to impact an exponentially larger amount of people. And so it's that delta that is really changing the way brands have to approach consumers. And last is social and shopping discovery. And the big thing here is we shop different. It bridges with digital literacy, and that especially millennials and Gen Zs, we know how to self-educate. If you go back a generation and you look at how consumers even walked into the mall. About 50% less people knew what they were going to buy when they walked into the mall a generation ago. They actually used the concentrations of brands of stores as a way to drive product discovery. Today, we all curate the brands we interact with and our discovery engine. So that comes down everything from who you follow on social media, what media you decide to consume. We have way more control over how we curate the media and the products we discover. So it's a big difference on really having to earn those interactions with customers as opposed to be able to, brute force drill right down to your target audience. Couple things, so that's a lot of stuff. Question next needs to be, what do I do about that? We talked about more tools and different tools, not less tools. And the first thing, it sounds like we've bridged two different sessions. Authenticity needs to be the key word. So we could talk about data for hours and hours about how consumers truly are responding and demanding authenticity from brands, demanding more human interactions, demanding interactions with more context. Today's consumer actually expects you to know who they are. And this touches on everything from personalization to brand voice, understanding your customers, but making sure that you cut through that noise and don't just reach the customer, but reach them with a valuable message. So I guess thesis of the afternoon should be that we really all need to embrace the storytelling power of our customers. Quite often today, our customers are our best marketers, and that requires a new set of activity and a new viewpoint to creating some of the touch points throughout the customer journey. So that's where we come in. Pixlee we're a user-generated content marketing platform. So we help brands really across travel and hospitality, from airlines and Air New Zealand to hospitality brands like Kimpton Hotels, Airbnb, the IHG family, and then cruise lines, Carnival Cruise as an example, helping them discover and take the entire workflow from that discovery of customer-generated content, the curation, the rights management, and then the distribution to actually use that content in creating brand experiences. And then lastly, as every marketer, making sure you're actually understanding the impact of that. So as we use different types of content in everything from an email marketing to an ad placement to on my website, how do I take these customer stories, this authentic visual content, and use it to drive a real marketing result? So why is this important? Why is user-generated content something that continues to come up both in the travel and hospitality industry and really across just about every major consumer vertical? Why is it a really big deal? And so I drill this down to three major points. The first being scale and quality. And as the phones in our pockets continue to get higher and higher power and the content we can create with them more and more relevant, from a marketing context, it's getting harder and harder to distinguish between a stock photo and an Instagram photo. And then the scale just doesn't stop. So when we think about the over 10 billion pieces of visual content that are created and put across the internet every day, a lot of those have to do with the brands, the places, and the experiences that we love. If you scroll through your own, I have my dog, my family, and my hobbies. And that's true for most consumers. The second being trust. There's a lot of steps in content strategy that you get to skip when you actually market with a customer story, because it has the peer proof, it has the social proof, it has a built-in innate storytelling element, because this is a real story. This is a real interaction between a person and your brand. And then the third is insight, and this takes one step away from the content marketing element of user-generated content and focuses on understanding your customers. I think user-generated content really is your brand experience. It is the post-purchase interaction, and it's become a very important way for folks to understand what elements of their customer journey are the most marketable. So we talk a lot about Instagrammable moments in travel, and this is anything from Carnival Cruise happens to have a giant Vegas-style wheel when you walk in. It wasn't in a single piece of marketing collateral when we started working with them, and when you actually distill down and start looking at what people talk about, how people are introduced to their cruise experience, there's a lot of content being generated across social media about that very, very Wheel of Fortune. So as a brand, figuring out how you take those Instagrammable moments and make sure they map and correlate to the moments you're marketing with. It's a really good indicator of alignment between how people perceive the brand and how you move into the market and portray the brand through your own voice. So this is something brands are starting to do. We talked about user-generated content in the last session. More and more, you're starting to see this as a way to augment and supplement professional creative and stock photography, and it's working. So I think that the big takeaway from this slide, this is aggregated data across about 200 of our customers, is UGC is having a real impact on marketing performance across nearly every channel, up and down the marketing stack and across the customer journey. So when we talk about on page, anything from a listing page trying to drive conversion with a visual review, up the funnel to a display ad, being able to show real-time content from customers experiencing whatever it may be, has had a real efficacy boost to most forms of marketing. So, real examples, understanding how brands are taking the emphasis on authenticity, the access to real customer stories, and using them to improve marketing. I'm going to go through 3 examples and then happy to open it up and answer some questions. So the first example, I touched on this a moment ago, but using UGC to drive brand.com conversion. So I think especially on the OTAs, but ratings and reviews are a part of online shopping today. Whether they're a part of your brand experience or not, that digital literacy component, today's shopper goes and self-educates. So being able to bring that experience, curate it down through a platform like ours, and then display that lens into the customer experience directly on your brand.com. So in the case of Kimpton Hotels, what they are doing is they're actually taking customer content of specific properties and making sure that next to that professional creative, you're actually able to see a real customer experience and understand it's not just a brand voice. This is supplemented with the fact that everything Kimpton says about its experience and about its brand is personified and resonates within that same user-generated content sitting next to it. Globally, across the travel vertical, we're actually seeing on page that when a customer interacts with user-generated content while browsing and shopping, they're 1.7 times more likely to buy. So you'll see similar metrics across most channels, that conversion metric being a big driver of UGC in travel. Second is a Breckenridge example of using this content in display ads. And this is one of my favorite examples, and that's not just because it drove an incredibly high boost in click-through, but because of the common sense of it. If I'm on a Thursday afternoon and I see a targeted ad from Breckenridge Resorts, and instead of showing me last season's or start of season, splash creative, I actually am looking at someone on the chairlift yesterday. And so from a software standpoint, there's some hurdles to be able to deliver that and deliver that real-time curated content. That's really where we live. But from a brand experience perspective, I think the options are pretty awesome, both in the timeliness of delivering content, but also the personalization. So the same way we can personalize content on the variable of time, there's no reason that me from San Francisco, me as a demographic and market area may respond to content very differently than New York travelers to Breckenridge. So being able to overlay what you know from an insights perspective with a near unlimited asset class of user-generated content creates some really cool opportunities. And then last one, a little less of a performance marketing example. So we talked about branding in the last session, and this is one of my favorite examples of user-generated content, because most of the conversation when you read about the space and how brands have started using is all around performance. It's deltas in conversion, it's deltas in click-through, and that's important stuff. But the other half of marketing is the emotive and experiential piece. And how can I use this content not just to drive a click-through, but to actually portray a message? What Whistler Blackcomb, when they started working with Pixlee, they obviously are a world-renowned winter destination. And they were really working to be a 365 business and had built a hugely conceptual, large summer campaign. And they had their creative plans built, they had shoots scheduled, and the content they actually ended up leading with, they came to the conclusion that I don't need to build this image and tell people this is a fantastic summer destination. I can skip a lot of those steps if I just show consumers real people having that experience. And so they were lucky enough that content existed, as I'm sure it does with most brands, and they were able to access it and actually lead with story-driven marketing, rather than needing to first start with a brand voice and then validate it. They made user-generated content a big piece of that campaign. There's a question slide next and a takeaway if I can get there.
Just the one above that. Yeah, you press the other.
Oh, user error. Cool. So before we jump into questions, major takeaways from this session. 1, today's shopper expects a more authentic and personal experience from brands. 2, brands need to embrace this. This is actually a good thing, and embrace the story power of their customers. And then 3rd, user-generated content is one of the tools and new ways that brands are actually bridging this gap and helping use their customers to drive better experiences and better marketing from the beginning of the customer journey through to the end. Sweet. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew. I like the way you talked about the democratization of marketing and word of mouth on steroids, because I've been thinking about this word authentic. You know, we bandy it around a lot. And the opposite of authentic is inauthentic, right? And I really wonder if it's a passé term, because authentic is authentic to them, right? If I'm not in the same demographic as someone who is, I'm not a millennial, obviously. So a millennial posting what's really cool to them, me as a late boomer, look, I don't care, That's nice, it's not interesting to me. So I just kind of wondering what you think about that and how that ties into these themes of personalization that were talked about this morning, and where are we going? Because, so I guess there's a lot in there, but is authentic really meaningful anymore? And what's the role of personalization with UGC going forward?
It's the right question. I think it's an easy shortcut working with UGC to say it's real content, so it's authentic. I actually don't think that's the point and why user-generated content has been so effective. Authentic is specific to the brand. It's specific to the customer. And so the important thing, and UGC does not replace other forms of creative. The important thing is using a mix of user-generated content as well as everything else in your tool belt to be authentic, to own who you are as a brand, and make sure you understand your customers enough that your version of authentic is also theirs. That's a really important piece.
Yeah, because I have friends who I know they have miserable lives, but if you go on Facebook, it's all hunky-dory. They're such liars that it's not authentic. But anyway, that's a whole other story. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, we have one down here. Let me get the, Mr. Gunstone is here. He wants us to throw it, but we don't have enough insurance. Oh, there we go.
Not throwing it. I'm a terrible catch as well. My question is, how do you manage the usage rights for UGC, and is that managed within the platform? Because that's always a bit of a barrier, is making sure that they know that you're using it and you have full rights to use it. So how do you manage that?
So it's always the first question, and it's the right first question, because user-generated, there's a lot of obstacles and parameters of user-generated content that are completely foreign relative to other types of content. The simple answer is we always expect and recommend our customers actually go out to the end consumer and get explicit rights to use the content. Our platform automates a lot of that to make it easy, but it's interesting that when we started about 5 years ago building Pixlee, we built that workflow and that rights management to get over the hurdle of exactly the hurdle you're talking about. And what we learned was the touch point of reaching out to a customer that has organically posted about and shared their experience with your brand is an awesome branding moment. So, I would think the 2 takeaways are rights management has not been a big hurdle with UGC. It's very different than influencer-driven content that you're actually soliciting. Even though it lives on social media, you're soliciting this content. The user-generated content that we've seen drive the best performance as a marketing asset is the organic content. And so it's being posted not because they're incentivized, it's because they truly had a great experience with your brand. So being able to reach out to them at scale, obtain the rights so you're making sure you're compliant, but at the same time, thank them. At the same time, celebrate them. It makes the workflow, super beneficial.
I had a question for you about the announcement you had with ListTrack. I think it was just last month, where you now have got the ability to pull UGC into email and have that pushed out. Are you seeing anything different with that, with how that performs, or how it resonates? I mean, it's slightly different metrics because you don't really share email the way you do other stuff. What's going on there?
It's a good question. I think the important thing about content. It comes from social, a highly shareable platform, but it's effective anywhere content lives. So ListTrack being an email service provider that works with a lot of travel brands similar to Pixlee, we made the technical component easier. I think what gets lost is the reason the content works is because of the content, the customer, and the brand. It's that alignment. From being ListTrack and Pixlee, from a software perspective, our job is to make the content as easy to use, as easy to measure, and give you as many different ways to use these customer stories. But the effectiveness is pretty simple. If I'm pre-purchase and I've just booked a week-long stay, being able to show me experiences from customers that came before me, how much time did they spend at the pool? Oh, I didn't realize I could wake surf. I didn't realize there was a nightlife where I was going. Having the breadth of content that resonates true experiences is, from an email marketing perspective, is super valuable. Right. Especially email being one of the easier channels right now to leverage your CRM, leverage what you know about your customers, and personalize that content.
Yeah, and as an email guy, I would say it's probably earlier in the funnel too that you got to be careful what you're leveraging. We have a question from the audience, which I'll read to you. Isn't it aspirational to proclaim that you pass through the customer, the hotel, and let them solely own the relationship with the customer? I'm not sure I'm quite understanding, but I think
I get it. I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
What I'm reading this as is, isn't it aspirational to say, I'm going to hand the keys to my brand over to my customers? And I would say, I'm not sure it's even aspirational. I'm not sure there ever will be a point where marketing is where it's actually that pervasive across the customer base. The important thing is you still own your brand. User-generated content is not a threat to you as a marketer. It's really an asset. So I think being able to approach the conversation that's happening, identify what aligns with who you're trying to be as a brand, with who you're marketing to, and bringing that into your marketing is a good way to acknowledge it, but still control the message.
Okay. Good. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, right there. Let's see. Hold on, everybody. No, I'll bring it to you.
Hola.
Hola.
So, well, just for understand a little bit more about this, I work in a hotel, so in some cases we launch a summer sale, something like that. And we are capable to reunite all our photographs in our website using a hashtag or something like that of the experience of our guests. So what's the difference when using Pixlee?
Do I get your question right? As in, right now you're promoting some form of hashtag, so you're able to access a good portion of that content?
Yes, and we can reunite all the photographs on our website, like showing the experience of in the summer or, I don't know, some season of the hotel.
So what's the big difference? What's the difference? I think the difference is being able to, so the content exists. And I think at the example you're talking about, the important thing is the content's on your website. Is that when someone goes to your website, you're not just showing them the brand voice, you're also incorporating the customer voice. Where platforms like Pixlee or ListTrack from an email perspective start being valuable is being able to layer that content in all of the different marketing actions you perform. So if we're talking about, segmenting content by listing, if you're managing a lot of different properties, attaching content to different personas, or seasonality, it's the content management component of UGC, which is there's a lot more UGC, and I think the thing we haven't really touched on, the best part of it, is it's really unstructured data. It's your customer experience. Every photo comes with a lot more data than stock photo Z1768. So making that intelligence usable for a marketer is where platforms like ours are used.
And let's take the second question that's up on the screen. What happens when brands try to game the system and fake UGC? Is there a filter? Is there a way to prevent that?
It depends. If you're really good at faking it, I guess not. I'm not sure that's the point, though. I think the best part about UGC is it turns marketing from a linear funnel, the way a lot of us think about our marketing, from awareness on through to conversion, and it turns it into a wheel, where your best marketing asset becomes your customer experience. If you're doing a good job from beginning to end, the way social is not just a channel. It's actually the way we interact as people. So when I have a good experience, I talk about it online. So I get faking UGC. You can probably get away with it in terms of some of the siloed use cases on putting content on a listings page, for example. But the reasons and the value of the content across the whole customer journey will be lost in many ways.
So as a final wrap up, there's a question up there about strategies, and I think you talked about that in your talk already. Maybe we could turn that a little bit around and say any takeaways to wrap up the session about how to go out and increase and grow your UGC. How can we get our customers to give us stuff that we can use?
I'd say it's a challenge that should be tackled by the whole business, not just the marketing team, not just the sales team. Creating reasons that people talk about and share about your brand is everything from the experience on through to the way you communicate and market. As a marketer, I would say personalization, context, and experience are the words we just continue to hear conference after conference. And if we think of the intersection of those three concepts, user-generated content really sits there in terms of being authentic, being data-rich, and being highly personalizable. So it's one of the tools that absolutely should be incorporated in how you deliver a brand to market.
So ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon we're going to be authentic, but we're also going to be punctual. So Andrew will be at the Pixlee booth, will you not?
I will be there.
So feel free to stop by there and have further conversations with him. If you could please join me in giving Andrew Higgins of Pixlee a big round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.